So you or your family member has just been diagnosed with celiac disease and you're wondering, what now? What are you supposed to do? How is this going to affect you? What changes do you need to make? My name is Melissa. This channel is dedicated to gluten-free, celiac-safe cooking and baking tips and recipes. Feel free to follow along for more. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about our celiac journey in the hopes that maybe it will help someone else. So the first thing you need to realize is how sensitive celiac disease really is and how easily cross-contamination can occur. We're going to talk a little bit more about what does that mean practically in a little bit, but first I'm going to give you some examples. When my kids were really little, before they were diagnosed, we would go to visit my family and my kids would, for lack of a better term, end up glutening my sister. Not on purpose, we weren't knowingly bringing gluten into the house, but my kids would bring gluten on their hands, on their mouth, on their clothes, from lunch, from breakfast, from the snack that was in the car, from the crumbs left over from those snacks in the car seats. And they would bring that gluten without realizing it, and it would end up on my sister's bedding and on her stuffed animals and on her things as they would touch things. And then my sister later, when she was messing with her things, or maybe she moved her blanket while she was eating, she would end up getting glutened accidentally. We ended up having to change our clothes and wash our hands and our face as soon as we showed up to avoid getting those tiny particles of gluten onto my sister. And that way she wouldn't transfer those particles then to her mouth. Because even if she washed her hands, if they were in her bedding, that would get transferred to her later. You know, you don't always wash your hands every time you put on chapstick, you know, that kind of thing. Another time, my mom ended up making some food using cinnamon. Now, cinnamon doesn't have gluten naturally, but this cinnamon had been in the house for a while, and the last time it was used when they were making glutened products. And so tiny particles of gluten or flour or the mix had gotten in the cinnamon, and that tiny little bit of cinnamon that was sprinkled in oatmeal, I think it was, ended up glutening my sister. One last example is my kids ended up getting gluten from jelly beans. Now the jelly beans themselves did not have any gluten products, but they were made at a facility that made glutened products, and they got gluten from the cross-contamination. We just didn't think about it. We'd had those jelly beans since Easter, and they got diagnosed right after. So this brings me back to the practical application of how does this sensitivity affect what you do next? Celiac disease is different than regular gluten intolerance. So restaurants that have gluten-free menus often have those menus geared towards people with gluten intolerance. It's not the same thing for celiac disease. If a restaurant makes a pizza with a gluten-free pizza crust, but they make it on the same surface as the regular pizza crusts, or they make it with the same gloves as the regular pizza crust, or they use the same utensil to spread the sauce as the regular pizza, or the same pizza stones, or the same pizza rack, or the same toppings that have been exposed to flour, then it's not safe for someone with celiac disease, even though somebody who has just regular gluten intolerance might handle it just fine. Some restaurants do try to be aware of celiac disease. Like Chick-fil-A at one point said that they were going to use separate fryers and that kind of stuff if people would let them know about their dietary issues. But even with that, even with the gluten-free menu options and the separate fryers, my kids on a trip to Chick-fil-A ended up getting glutened. And I'm sure that they were careful, but unless the entire kitchen is gluten-free, it is very, very hard to not have cross-contamination. Which brings me to my next point, home. Because it's very, very hard to find restaurants where they're fully gluten-free and fully safe for celiac people, most of your meals are going to end up being at home, which tends to lead to healthier eating and more budget-friendly eating anyway, so like if I'm honest, eating at home is not a bad thing. But this leads to the first real big thing that you end up needing to do after your celiac diagnosis, which is basically to overhaul your kitchen. Now some people may be able to get away with designating specifically gluten-free utensils and specifically gluten-free cooking things and gluten-free foods and that kind of stuff and not have any issue. But without completely eradicating gluten from your home, the risk of contamination is still there. So what does that look like? 1, get rid of all gluten items in your home, from your fridge, from your counters, from your freezer, from your pantry, all of it. 2, get rid of and replace any seasonings, spices, and sauces that you have opened, and make sure whatever you replace them with is certified gluten-free. Some will have labels, some you'll need to look up online. 3, deep clean everything. Oven, cabinets, pantry, counters, surfaces of bottles, dishes, utensils, all of it. 4, get rid of and replace anything you can't get fully cleaned. The toaster, the waffle maker with the coils in the back. 5, replace your scrub brushes for your dishes and such. 6, deep clean your vehicles, couches, chairs, rugs, anywhere where gluten crumbs would like to hide. And then sweep and mop and wipe down any of the other surfaces where food could have come in contact. 7, when you go through your food items, consider items that may be gluten-free in and of themselves, but you may have accidentally contaminated with gluten. Butter, peanut butter, jelly, things where you would, use a knife on bread and then maybe put the knife back in. That jar of peanut butter is no longer safe. Ideally, you want your home to be a safe space, and to do that, gluten has no place in it. Which brings me to my next point that I'm just going to briefly touch on in this video. Once you have returned your home to its factory settings, do your best to avoid bringing gluten back into it. That means looking at labels a lot more closely, and then maybe looking things up online if the label isn't clear. And there are a lot of things that should be gluten-free. They don't mention any gluten products on the label, but when you look it up online, they are processed at a facility that processes gluten items. And so the risk of contamination from those facilities is high enough that they are not certified gluten-free, like those jelly beans from earlier. Lastly, not everyone has the same reactions to getting glutened, but when you've been off of gluten for a long time and you have it again, it is not uncommon to have a much stronger reaction to it than you would when you were eating it all the time, every day. In addition, not everyone has the same sensitivities to minute levels of gluten. But when you're working on detoxing your body and healing your gut, it's important to err on the side of being too careful and then slowly adding things back in, like eating out at a restaurant and stuff, to see how your gut handles it, than to err on the side of not being careful enough and hurting your gut in the long run. It's also important to realize that not everyone has strong symptoms, physical symptoms that they feel to being glutened, but their gut is still being damaged, and a raw gut can really cause problems for you later. So be careful and good luck. I will leave it there for now. Please feel free to ask any questions in the comments and I'll do my best to help. I hope that this has been beneficial and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.